A lot of requests from people about the rack pull and about deadlift heights and positions. So let me just explain what the huge benefits of the rack pull are. Well, not a lot of people have the flexibility, mobility and strength and training experience to deadlift clean off the floor. They also don't have the strength in the glute, the erector, the extensor muscles, so the glutes, the hamstrings and the spine. One of the best things about the rack pull is that you can progress from the higher pull slowly down as your hamstrings and glutes and spinal erectors develop in strength over time. It's a great way of teaching extension, but a great way of slapping lots of muscle, especially onto the glutes and spinal erectors and back. When you set this exercise up, for most people, it's harder to learn the movement from a very, very small position. Often you should have done some level of 45-degree hip extension or dumbbell Romanian deadlift to learn the pattern. I would never teach a rack pull to anybody without doing any level of 45-degree hip extension to learn how to actually go through that movement pattern, to actually get a stronger set of erectors muscles, develop the glutes in isolation, whether it's on a glute bridge, whether or not it's on the 45-degree hip extension, or whether or not it's on a single leg press, whatever it may be, split squats. But the rack pull, in my opinion, still is a very, very advanced compound exercise that should come in still in line with when you start to do squats, when you start to do any form of deadlift or Romanian deadlift. So you should always have learnt how to hip extend before you actually start putting something like the rack pull in. But what should you look for in a rack pull if you're going to do it? Well, first and foremost, I like to do the rack pull below the knee, so that at least from this position here, if you do that level of extension from there, there's very minimal loading to the glutes. Now, the problem with a very, very high rack pull and being minimal loading through the glutes is there's a lock through the spinal erectors. And if you want to facilitate an optimal rack pull, you will take it below the knees so that there is a bit more of a degree of hip flexion and a lot more support from the glutes. So we want to train this movement. And like I said, if all you're doing is this, we've got no tension on the bar here and minimal tension on the bar there, and then maximal tension on the bar there. So somewhere halfway in between to learn this movement, because there is no point doing a rack pull, especially for hypertrophy, and coming to this position here. You don't need to lock out. So what I would say with the rack pull is, if you see my hands come down, I've got a degree of hip flexion, spinal erectors are on, abs are tight, extension, and then I've got the bar. So I'm in this position here. What I don't want when I do a rack pull is to lead with my chest, okay? That's the first thing you don't want to do. If you lead with your chest, you're forcing your lumbar. If you watch my lower back, hopefully Gus can just catch my lower back. If I lead with extension, you'll see that this middle part, the lumbar part of my back, takes the load initially. So then I'm extending through my lumbar. If ever you've done a rack pull and your lower back's sore, your lower back aches, and you probably can't do much else on in the gym, there's a very strong chance that you've just done lumbar flexion and extension. So what we're looking for is a neutral spine, and the extension's coming from the hips. So it's this. Now, a lot of the problems that you see with people doing a rack pull is there's a rounding and it's here. And you've got a lumbar movement, you've got poor thoracic movement, so they're all hunched over. Well, that immediately is putting a load and a flexion through the lumbar spine. And if you do that progressively over time, not only are you going to lead yourself into creating a potential injury, but you're teaching a faulty pattern that when you add more load, inevitably it will cause you pain. But you probably, with this exercise, if you're flexed over here, you're not even using any of your hip. And any form of deadlift is going to require a hip extension. So whether or not you're coming from the floor here, it's a hip extension movement. That's what we're looking for. So when we go to the rack pull, it's similarly an extension movement. Now we're going to come down to here, and you're going to extend the hip and the knee to a certain degree. It's not just a Romanian deadlift, and Romanian deadlift is just the pelvis, but you're going to come down to this position here, and we're going to come up, down, up. So you need to consider strengthening the glutes, strengthening the hamstrings, and strengthening the spinal erectors. As I said earlier, it needs to come from doing all the precursor exercises, glute bridge, glute med exercises, abduction exercises. It needs to come from doing spinal extension, hip extension on the 45-degree hip extension, which you can see the videos on my YouTube channel. The optimal setup for the rack pull, let's just go through it one more time. Feet and hips shoulder width apart. Bending at the hip, slight at the knee. Neutral spine. When we extend, we're coming from the hip up. We're not leaving ourselves in this flex position here. Retraction, maintaining a level of thoracic extension, but not lumbar extension. So we're not extending through the lumbar. You're in this position here, and we come up, down, pull, glute, hamstring, glute, hamstring. And we're not getting all this lumbar flexion and extension. Over time, if you execute that perfectly, you will develop very strong erector muscles, spinals. Definitely you'll develop your traps, your glutes will develop at a huge rate, and you have a fantastic progress lift, or even a lift you can leave in isolation, onto things such as the deadlift. Now, one other thing to consider, because of the heavy loading and the amount of loading being placed on the thoracic here, you wouldn't necessarily want to do this under heavy load for a very high number of repetitions, because your thoracic extension will lose a lot of its ability to maintain that tension upright, and in turn will then push down the vertebrae and cause some level of flexion at the lumbar spine. If you're more advanced, don't take that specifically, because you've been training yourself for a long period of time to maintain that. If you're new, I would leave you between 8, 10 and 12 repetitions for the rack pull as a maximum. So the rack pull is a fantastic exercise. Do it below the knee, develop glute strength, hamstring strength, hip extension strength before you move on to it. And remember, it's not about lumbar extension, it's about hip, pull through, hip, pull through. Great exercise, you're going to get a lot from it, and implement all the teaching cues and advice that I've given you, and you'll really make some good progress.